that it's a good act and well laid out. What will the second act be like? Shall we need the third, or will the action be exhausted in the second? So this gives you kind of a sense of how he thinks about all of this. He gets something from his librettist, he ponders it a little bit, and makes suggestions. In the fall of 1920, and this is just a few months after the project started, and is Turandot sleeping? So again, he's not gotten anything from his librettist. The more I think of it, the more it seems to me the sort of subject that one wants nowadays, and that suits me perfectly. But it must have a good comic element and the right kind of sentiment. So again, he's giving them some clues here. Then about a month later, I'm afraid that Turandot will never be finished. It's impossible to work like this. When the fever abates, it ends by disappearing, and without fever there is no creation, because emotional art is a kind of malady, an exceptional state of mind, over-excitation of every fiber and every atom of one's being, and so on, auditorium. All right? So here again, we get this notion that he's having to nudge them along. About a year later, his spirits are high. He's actually getting things from them. He feels, he's kind of in the zone with this opera. And he says, Turandot is going well. I feel that I'm on the high road. I'm at the masks, so he's now writing the scene in Act 2 for Ping, Pang, and Pong. And in a little while, I come to the riddles. Now, the riddles are the three riddles that Koloff must answer as a precondition to get Turandot's hand. I had a question earlier about the number 3 in the opera, and I'll just mention that, yes, there are many, many instances in this opera of 3. We've got the 3 ministers, we've got the 3 riddles. Things tend to happen in 3s. He says, I think I've made great strides. What about Act 2 and Act 3? For God's sake, don't wear me out waiting. Now, throughout the gestation period of this opera, which ran to almost 4 years, Puccini and his librettist have this back and forth, back and forth. At times, he's riding so high, he can barely stand it. He's ready to write. And then at other times, the bottom drops out, and he can barely muster the strength to finish. One of my favorite moments or lines from this, he says things like, I have no good news about Turandot. I'm beginning to be worried about my laziness. Can I have had enough of China? Because I have composed one whole act and nearly finished the second. I am certainly failing to write anything else that's good. I'm also old. And then in the next paragraph he says, but this Chinese world, I shall certainly come to a decision of some sort in Milan. Now he's on his villa outside of Milan. And he regularly went to Milan to come in contact with his librettist and also his publisher, Ricordi, who is based in Milan. He says, perhaps I shall return the money and cancel the contract. I've tried again and again to write the music for the introductory scene of Act 1 and cannot. I don't feel comfortable in China. So, we really get this sense that he is having issues with this. Even in the final year of the project, which was 1924 in the summer, he says, I'm bored. I must get this Turandot finished. Please send me the verses. I'll take the work up again and will do me good. Idleness does not suit me. So he's cajoling these gentlemen who are doing other things to send him material. In 1923, Puccini began experiencing a chronic throat problem. Now, he had smoked all his life, and he eventually sort of began to become a bit obsessed about this throat problem. It was a chronic problem. At times, it would actually prohibit him from doing any work. He consulted various specialists about it. He was given several different diagnoses. Eventually, he was sent to a doctor in Florence who decided that this was throat cancer, and it was malignant, and it was inoperable. But neither Puccini nor his wife were told the diagnosis. Puccini's son knew. And the suggestion was that Puccini go to a clinic in Brussels, which was one of the 2 cities that was performing a type of surgery that could perhaps relieve this. The other was Berlin. So in November of 1924, Puccini leaves for Brussels. And he takes with him a handful of sketch material for the very last scene of Turandot, the scene involving Kaloff and Turandot, their big sort of confrontation scene in the last act, where Turandot thaws, where she ceases to be this ice princess who throughout the opera has been a man-hater because one of her ancestresses was brutally murdered. And with Kaloff's kiss, she warms to his love. So he takes these sketches with him to Brussels, thinking that he'll be able to work on them. He still doesn't know what the problem is. So throughout the month of November 1924, he's in hospital. And he does exchange some letters with his librettists. One which reads, "Here I am, poor me. They say that I shall have 6 weeks of it, 6 weeks of treatment. You can imagine how pleased I am." And Turandot? And then just a few days later, his last letter to Giuseppe Adami. "So far the treatment is not too bad. External applications. But on Monday, God knows what they're going to do with me in order to get at the epiglottis from underneath. They assure me that it will not be painful, and they say too that I shall be cured. Some days I had lost all hope of recovery, and what hours and days I have passed, I'm prepared for anything. Write me sometimes, yours affectionately, Puccini." And he died 2 days later. So throughout this long process, we have a composer who is racked with doubt and anxiety about being able to make something out of this story. The question is, why was this so difficult for him? And I think there are a couple of reasons. Puccini was the heir apparent to Giuseppe Verdi. He was, in a sense, the crown prince of Italian opera. He had other competition, Ruggero Leoncavallo, Pietro Mascagni, other composers who were writing, but really Puccini had been crowned the king of Italian opera. His publisher Ricordi put a lot of emphasis in making sure that this is how he was promoted. And I think the pressure for him to write this very, very large work, which was his most ambitious to date, caused him some difficulties. And I think he also understood that there were some problems with the way the story was structured, because the act of moving from one medium to another when you create an opera libretto, you go from a play or a short story or a novel or whatever, involves compromises. Things get left out, things get added on. They changed the end, they being Puccini and his librettists, changed the fundamental ending of Gozzi's play. Because in Gozzi's Turandot from 1762, the title character is more human. She's less resistant to the affections of a man. And there's also a lot of kind of court intrigue and complexity, but the basic story there is that she has always kind of been